Washington's defense is faster, but communication will decide everything.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, your guy on the ground, David Harrison. And on today's episode, Washington will have to replace Bobby Wagner's command by committee, and disguise only works when every defender sells it. But first, speed matters only after communication travels cleanly. We're continuing to run down my notes, observations, and thoughts analysis, all of it from OTAs and Washington Commanders minicamp. And from the defensive side of things, it's become very, very clear that speed is useless if the call travels late. And this isn't just for the Washington Commanders defense. It's really any defense. When you look at the Brian Flores defense that Daronte Jones is coming from, I think you can see a lot of translation there. Now, we know that the Washington Commanders defense is younger this year. It's faster this year. But the question really is whether or not defensive coordinator Daronte Jones can make it smarter, make it more deceptive, and make it better at communicating, because that is where the last versions of the Washington Commanders defense that we saw really fell off, was their ability to not just communicate, but understand the communication, execute the task within that communication. From what we saw during the OTA period and the 3-day mandatory minicamp, I do believe that Daronte Jones is not just installing a new defense, he's upgrading the way that Washington thinks about defense. It's a completely new style of defense because of it. And because of that, this year's defense is going to have a higher ceiling than before due to its speed, its multiplicity, and its ability to disguise. But there is a condition to all of that, to that multiplicity, to that disguise ability, to all that speed, all of it. The upside, the communication has got to continue improving, and eventually it'll catch up to the speed that the players are moving at, because communication is going to be the backbone of this entire thing. It's going to either hold the defense up or it's going to crumble, and the defense is going to come crumbling down with it. A quote that stood out from the OTA period, mandatory minicamp period, from Daronte Jones said, quote, "Making sure you have 11 on the field, making sure the guys are lining up right with the right fronts, getting the calls, getting the communication across defensively so everything matters," end quote. And you hear in that quote alone, he's not even talking about the execution. He's not even talking about the athleticism. He's not even talking about making the play. He's just talking about getting 11 dudes on the field that are all in the right position, that they're all talking, they all understand what is happening, because every part of the defense matters every day. As you're going to remember, we've talked about this a lot, that on defense, you have to have 11 guys working for one cause. One dude messes up, one guy slips up, and the entire thing can fall apart. On offense, I think I've used the analogy before, if Terry McLaurin slips on his route, the play can still be successful because there are other options. On defense, if you're in, say, the fewer guys you have in coverage, the worse it is. But even if you're saying quarters coverage, one guy slips in his coverage, and that could doom the entire play. Jones isn't talking about communication as some generic coach speak phrase, some way to answer a question without answering a question. What he's talking about is the defense that comes before the defense, before the coverage, before the pressure, before the disguise, before anybody gets to run fast. The front has to be right. The call has to get in. The back end has to echo the call. The defense has to know what the offense is showing. Then, and only then, after all that's done, once the ball is snapped, the speed can actually become useful. That is the trade-off here. The defense has a higher ceiling than last year's group, undoubtedly, as far as I'm concerned, but it may also have a more dangerous floor, because while speed can help fix a lot and mask a lot, it can also expose mistakes faster if the defense doesn't communicate everything they need to communicate properly. And along with that, the team also needs to find its critical leadership voice with Bobby Wagner no longer in the locker room or on the field. And that is the part that I don't think you can just kind of cast away, right? Once it became clear to everybody that Bobby wasn't coming back, through the comments at the combine, et cetera, through the drafting of Sonny Styles, all this stuff, once it kind of became evident that, and especially Leo Chenal getting number 54, once all of this became evident, it kind of just became, it's like, okay, boom, there's a line here. Bobby's not coming back. Walk away from it. I don't think it can be looked at that casually. I think Washington, while you're going to obviously replace Bobby Wagner's snaps, and to a certain extent, you can even replace his tackle ability. You can replace his production on the field. You're going to get better, hopefully, in the coverage ability. It can't just putting another dude in that position doesn't just replace the authority he brings to the locker room. And honestly, the authentication, right? The credibility that it brings to the defense. Having Bobby Wagner on the field on your defense brings a level of credibility. Dan Quinn talked about this, said, quote, "Well, we've seen probably more in his communication and ability, play calling of things that kind of were naturally deferred to Wags," end quote. He was talking about Frankie Luvu, who is obviously a candidate to potentially replace Bobby Wagner and that presence he had on the field, because Washington didn't just add speed, it added an element of surprise to counter that offensive thought process using deception, communication, role simplicity, interestingly enough, for such a complex defense, and group ownership of the defensive structure. Frankie Luvu, talking to us during the offseason program, said, quote, "Every time we're in the room, he," talking about Daronte Jones, "talks about us having our thinking caps on, just having that PhD of the playbook, knowing what we're getting, the looks, knowing why we're doing it, and not just doing things without no reason why we're doing it." And that is one of the biggest things that has really stood out to me during this year's offseason program, is players wanting to know the why, but not just players wanting to know the why, coaches delivering the why. It's not just, here's your assignment, now go do it. It's, here is what the offense is showing. Here is why your leverage matters. Here is why the guy across from you is showing pressure or whatever they're doing. And here's how all of that stuff ties together, why it's all important. And that is what Daronte Jones is really changing. The way everybody thinks about defense in Washington. Before you even play defense, it's about the philosophy of defense, the mindset of the defense. We used to have a saying in my previous career, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And what you mean by that when you say that kind of stuff is that by being deliberate, being controlled in your execution, you then get to act faster when it's time to do so, because there's no mistake to correct. There's no backtracking to go through. On the football field, the translation is not about rushing to a guess. Let me make a check just because I need to make a check. Guy went in motion. I just need to make a call. And I think this is the right call because I think I memorized the coaching. I think I memorized the meeting. And from my memory in the meeting, this is the check that I make. No, you have to understand why. Why? If a coach tells you, hey, if this receiver, if we go from 3-by-1 to 2-by-2 shotgun, running back in the backfield and it's 3rd and 6, we're going to make this check. Why are we making this check against this team, this quarterback, this offense? If the defender understands why they're doing it, then you have a much better opportunity of remembering and retaining the right thing to do. And you also understand the multitude of checks that you can make and adjustments you can make. And even if Daronte Jones is on the sideline or wherever he is, and he sees emotion in mind, he goes, this is the check they should make. And then on the field, they make a different kind of check. As long as the different kind of check still addresses the why of what you're trying to do, and it makes sense and it fits, it can still be successful. And even Daronte on the side of the field, okay, not the check that I was going to make, but it still fits the why of what we're doing. It just gives you that much more ability to control what you're doing. So while the defense is playing faster, it's playing more athletic, it's not going to matter if that speed and athleticism just pulls players out of position even faster than before, because nobody understands what's going on the field. Cornerback Mikey Sainristil said, quote, "When you embrace your role, understand what you're supposed to be doing out there, doing your job, doing your 1/11th, it makes the game that much more simple," end quote. And that is the really interesting part. A defense that is actually more complex. It's actually more confusing to the offense, and it requires players to know more about it, to be able to do more with it, is being described as simpler by one of the youngest members of the defense on the team. And yes, Mikey Sainristil has been known from before he was drafted for his football IQ, but it just shows you what the education process is like. Once the education is in place, the process becomes simple, because not only do you understand it, but the players begin to own it. And that is when disguise turns speed into pressure. And that's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by Indeed. Sponsored jobs. Workplace chaos can show up fast, and that is where Indeed sponsored jobs comes in, because they know that finding the right person can make all the difference, because getting that great addition to your team can have a ripple effect around everyone around them. And the best organizations aren't trying to look at every possible option. They're focused on identifying the people or the person who truly match what it is they're looking for. And when you can spend more time evaluating great candidates and less time searching, everybody benefits. That's exactly what Indeed sponsored jobs is designed to help businesses do. And when you need the right person on the job, turn to Indeed sponsored jobs. And as a listener of this show, you get a $75 sponsored job credit so that your posting gets the premium status it deserves. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast to cash that in. That site again, Indeed.com/podcast. And make sure you let them know you heard about it right here on Locked On Commanders. Terms and conditions apply. But if you need to hire, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Daronte Jones wants chaos that only Washington understands. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day. And to the everydayers who come through for every single episode, like I do every day, I appreciate you coming through yet again today. If you want to get even more out of Locked On Commanders, check out the Locked On Commanders Everydayer Club, lockedoncommanders.supercast.com. You get your first week for free when you sign up today. From watching the practices, from talking to the players, it has become clear to me that the effort this offseason, it's all about alignment. It's all about communication, playing connected rather than just simply being faster and younger. Those are the buzzwords, right? Those are the buzzwords. It's all the stuff that we're all talking about. This team is faster. This team is younger. But again, what does it really mean? You put a day one licensed driver behind the wheel of the most souped up Camaro you can find on the market. They're going to wreck that bad boy, or they're going to drive it like your grandmother. No offense to any grandmothers out there who drive like BAs, but you're going to drive it in a way that's not supposed to be driven, and it's just not going to be effective. The speed, the youth, it doesn't matter if the education isn't there. Jones himself talks about the speed, but made sure to specify that it was connected to the effort, to the culture, the brotherhood, and to playing for each other, not just for yourself, saying quotes. Obviously, you see guys flying around, and that's just the effort. Coach Q, talking about Dan Quinn, does a great job of the culture that he's built here. But the effort and guys playing lights out and just giving all they got for their teammates, you can see that the brotherhood's been established here and guys playing for one another. I like the mindset. You can see the speed on the field, end quote. And what it really boils down to for me is designed chaos. This is important because the idea is that the defense will look like chaos to the offense. It's going to look a little chaotic to us. It's going to look a little chaotic to the fans in the stands, but it'll be an actually very, very meticulously coordinated from front to back to front type of operation where we see the defense moving much faster this year is at the second level. More specifically than it's at the second level in that linebacker group, whether it's rookie Sonny Styles, Leo Chenal, the new free agent from Kansas City, Jordan McGee, the young guy who's still out there trying to prove himself, or Frankie Luvu, who I kind of have dubbed it right now, the return of Frankie Luvu, because we're seeing Frankie Luvu play much more like the 2024 version than the 2025 version, who's just being swallowed by blocks and nothing in the scheme was helping him and accentuate his talents. He's playing much less encumbered, and the second level just looks faster. DQ himself said, quote, "Those four, I feel them in all different ways and different combinations," end quote. And Daronte Jones himself pointed to those guys flying around, the speed, all that stuff we just talked about, but also pointed out the communication. DQ called them the quote unquote hubs, as he calls them, the linebackers and the safeties both. And that is, again, kind of where this identity shift comes in, because it's all the more important, because the real change this season, again, isn't just what the defense is going to play, but how they get there. And that's where the disguise element comes in. That's where the design chaos element comes into this whole thing. It's a pre-snap picture that the defense presents to the offense, not just the quarterback either, the offensive line, as well as they try to set their protections and the communication well enough to avoid confusing itself. Right? That's the thing that can be done, because you got to be careful. We've seen this. Usually you see with offensive coordinators who just get too cute for their own good. It's like, yeah, you got a lot of trick plays. You got a lot of motions. You got a lot of shifts. You got a lot of all these things. But then your guys get false starts, or they get illegal formations, or they run the wrong routes because they're literally outsmarting themselves. So there's a line here that Daronte Jones is trying to walk, and the defense seems to be very confident they're walking it fairly well through the offseason program, because disguise is not magic, right? It's not just abracadabra, poof, quarterbacks confused. No, ultimately, every defense ends up in some form of cover 0, cover 1, cover 2, etc. Like all the coverage schemes you have, right? The magic, as it would appear on the film and on the field, would happen to how you get there, right? Like we just kind of talked about with Daronte Jones. His defense wants you to think it's cover 2, and this is really kind of a simplistic way of putting it too. But his defense wants you to think it's cover 2 when it's actually fire zone cover 3. Or he wants you to think it's fire zone cover 3 when it's actually cover 0 with man coverage across the board. But it only works if all 11 defenders are acting in the same movie. If the front and back end are tied together, the quarterback hesitates, the rush has a better chance to get home. But if one guy is wrong, you wind up with busted coverages. And if Daronte Jones gets this right, not only will Washington be faster, it'll be annoying. Like, that might be the best compliment you can give to a defensive unit, is they might be annoying. It'll make quarterbacks hold the ball. Like we said, it'll reset protections, and it's going to give second guess clean answers for your defense to go through. But the same disguise that confuses the quarterback, again, can confuse the defense if the rules of what they're doing, if the communication is not across the board from all 11 players. Adafe Owe, talking about how these variations matter, said, quote, "I think that's what DJ, Daronte Jones, does a really good job of having different variations of the same call. So once you start memorizing that and understand why you're doing that, when the game comes, we move fast, bullets flying, end quote. What do you hear there again? Why? Once you start understanding why you're doing that, again, across the board, not just on the defensive side, also on the offensive side. We're not going to dive too deep into that because we spent the last two episodes talking about the offense. Let's give the defense their shine here on this episode. The why absolutely matters. And Johnny Newton gave us the best quote about all this, sharing what Daronte Jones told his players, that they have to be, quote, a whole bunch of Denzel Washingtons, end quote. And that is really the entire idea here in this disguised defense. You want great actors, not just great football players, because it's got to be the same picture, but different answers. And it takes all 11, right? If Odafe Owe is doing his part of, I look the same, like this might be the fourth different call we're giving out of this look, but I look the same. Johnny Newton looks the same. Daron Payne looks the same. Trey Amos, Mikey Sainristil, Quan Martin, they all look the same. But if Nick Cross looks different, that can be enough, depending on the quarterback and, of course, the study and the IQ and all that stuff of the offensive line as well, setting the protection. That could be enough to say, hey, listen, they look like, I don't know, fire cover zone 3. They've run cover 2 out of this before, but check out that guy. He's doing something different. And what he's doing tells me this is actually cover 1 with a heavy blitz in front of it. If they pick that up, that's how they pick you apart. Every single man has to be on the same page. They got to be the Denzel Washingtons, quote unquote, from Johnny Newton. So great actors. And I mean, if everything looks the same, it opens up the pressures, the stunts that we have, because it all looks the same. So it just confuses the offense, slows them down, end quote. Design chaos, shock and awe, whatever you want to call it. As much as it looks like anarchy at times, it's actually very well defined and structured in its construction. And Johnny Newton followed that up. But the most important condition, what is it? Communication is everything. Quote, communication's everything. Literally right from Johnny Newton's mouth. Definitely pre-snap communication. Seeing what the offense has, knowing our assignments on the defense, any adjustments we have to what the offense is running, it all collaborates together, end quote. So who is going to be that main voice? Who is going to be the main guy on the field that gets them in line? Doesn't just echo the call from Daronte Jones, say, hey guys, here's what we're starting off with, because when that team goes in motion or they shift, or I think I see something different than what the call was originally going to defend, who is going to be the guy on the field that's going to replace Bobby Wagner's voice? That is next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Washington Commanders still need to find their new air traffic controller. That's a light way of putting what Bobby Wagner did, and it's really not even a greatly respectful way to do it. He did so much more for this team that I think people don't realize that he did. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Also, thank you for checking out WUSA9.com, where you can check out mine and all my colleagues' written work covering your Washington Commanders on a daily basis. Communication is the key, right? We've covered that, and that communication is going to come from two hubs. We talked about that. Dan Quinn talked about the safeties and the linebackers. Daronte Jones' scheme wants the entire back seven to see everything before the snap, and they want them to set the front up to play lightning fast as much as possible. Quan Martin made this clear in his own comments. The communications where the defense can look a little chaotic when you watch it, but if it's done right, it allows that front and the back to both play faster. The front seven and the back, 4 or 5, whatever, 4 in the math of front seven, back 5, or back 4, but it depends on how many guys you have on the field right now. If they're right, everybody can play fast. If they're late, everybody's going to be late, right? So Quan, what he said was it kind of runs through the safety, quote unquote, and that safeties help the players in front of them understand where the teams are trying to attack. That does not necessarily mean that a safety is going to wear the green dot, because mostly what we're talking about is your checks and your adjustments, right? But this is where games are won and lost before the snap. Fans and media, we're going to talk about sacks. We're going to talk about turnovers. We're going to talk about blown coverages, big plays, but the setup begins at the communication. Again, the Quan Martin quote, we get to see everything, and just helping out the guys in front of us, just knowing the weaknesses of the defense or where teams trying to attack when we line up certain ways, end quote. That brings us to leadership, because that's what Quan Martin just talked about, is putting people in the right position to be successful. That is leadership, because players will say that coaching stops on the sideline. So who is the voice that brings everyone together on the field where coaching has limited influence? Because it used to be Bobby Wagner, but he's not here now. So that's not going to be your great answer right now, though. The answer is kind of everybody, right? DQ even said that. It's kind of coming from a lot of different places. I think Frankie Luvu is the first obvious answer, but again, DQ made it clear that it's not one singular voice yet here for this defense. Now, they could do it by committee, but you want a general, right? You want a guy who really has that command presence on the defense, not to use a pun of the team name Commanders, but it fits there, right? So you got Frankie Luvu, you got Mikey Sainristil, you got the safeties, Will Harris, Nick Cross, Quan Martin, you got Sonny Styles. They're all part of that answer, right? But the leadership structure is still forming, it's still being figured out. Now, DQ did say that Frankie is communicating more, talking on things more naturally when he used to kind of defer to Bobby Wagner. So clearly Frankie Luvu is seeing the opening and stepping up to try to fill it. But he also said leadership is not something you just hand out. It's got to be earned, right? Guys got to want to follow you in this business with what they're doing right now. Again, it's not going to be one singular voice. Meanwhile, Mikey Sainristil's work and his leadership and his effort to step into that role has absolutely stood out as well. Sonny Styles is impressed with his love of ball and the communication skills. So I think the easy thing to say about this Commanders defense is that it got younger and faster, and it's true. But after listening to Daronte Jones, after listening to Dan Quinn, Johnny Newton, Quan Martin, all these guys, Nick Cross, Adafe Owe, you name a guy, after talking to all these guys, speed is not the question. The real question is whether they communicate fast enough, clearly enough, disguise well enough, and find the leadership they need to make all that speed, youth, and athleticism matter long term. If I'm projecting one player who's eventually going to become that new quote-unquote Bobby Wagner, I think unquestioned voice of this defense, it's got to be Sonny Styles. But right now, he's not there. And right now, you don't need him to be there. It's not a knock in any way, shape, or form. The dude needs to figure out how to be an NFL linebacker before he becomes the leader of an entire NFL locker room. But because his communication, size, love of the game, and second-level role all point to his upside, I think eventually he will get there. Could be this year, you know what I mean? But eventually he will get there. For now, I think Frankie Luvu, again, is that obvious choice. He's already been the emotional leader for the 2 years that he's been there. But, we just have to see him become that full-on air traffic controller that Bobby Wagner is. And you got to give a hat tip as well to Candy Waller of Bowie TV. She's been saying that she thinks Frankie Luvu is probably the front runner for the green dot. And again, leadership goes well beyond the green dot, but could certainly be that guy. Frankie has played 90% or more of the snaps his first 2 years in Washington. They're different jobs, right? Being a leader, being the caller of the plays, all that kind of stuff. But to be the ultimate Bobby Wagner type of leader, you got to marry those two. And Frankie could be in the process of doing that right now. Again, Mikey Sainristil also continues to grow into his role. He's not going to be a green dot guy as a perimeter corner or as a corner just in general. And of course, the safeties also have their role as well. So bottom line is, yes, Washington got faster, but the question is whether or not the Commanders have enough communication to play fast enough and really leverage that advancement that they made this offseason. Again, that quote from Daronte Jones says it all, quote, making sure you have 11 on the field, making sure the guys are lined up right in the right fronts, getting the calls, getting the communication across defensively so everything matters, end quote. So when you talk about this defense, when you watch this defense, if you get to come to training camp, if you go to a preseason game, regular season game, doesn't matter. Communication is where it all starts. So if you really want to be smart about how this defense is going to operate, watch the pre-snap communication, learn how effective it is, see how they do their business. That is where the money is going to be made, or that's where the sausage is going to be made, as the saying goes, for Daronte Jones' defense. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we'll continue to dive into my news, notes, and analysis from OTAs, mini camps as we chug along forward to training camp coming up in late July. Appreciate you coming back for that episode, coming through for this episode and any other episodes. And in between them, if you need to find me, you can do so on X at DHarrison82, on Instagram at DHarrison_82, or you can text me by becoming an all-access member of the Locked On Commanders Everyday Club, lockedoncommanders.supercast.com to sign up for that today. You get your first week free when you do that. To the Everydayers who come through for every single episode, I appreciate you coming through for yet another one today. And to everybody out there, thank you for coming through for today's episode. Thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And until we meet again, if you're out and about, please be safe. Please be kind. We will talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On podcast network, your team every day.